Hello, I'm Jennifer, and welcome to the Krewe Japan podcast, a weekly podcast where we take you on audio journeys through Japanese culture.
This time on Krewe of Japan podcast.
Welcome back to the Krewe of Japan podcast. I have Doug here with me.
Hello.
And we are here to talk today about Japan Society of New Orleans and just Japan societies in general. Today is one of those special episodes where we're going to chit-chat a little bit before the actual interview goes on. But Doug, there are a lot of Japan societies out here in America. I didn't even realize the expansiveness of the organizations.
So, full disclosure, I put together the media kit, what was it, 2 or 3 years ago that we have on our website?
Yeah.
That's when I found out how many Japan societies there were, because we have a connection to NAGES, which has an expansive network of Japan societies, and that I forget what it was. Is it advertising opportunities? I don't even know. I'm not pitching advertising opportunities right now in the middle of an episode. Absolutely. No. But that's how I found out. And yeah, I knew that there was a pretty big network. I didn't realize it's like 43.
Yeah, it's in the 40s, and it's always growing. I believe 2 new organizations just formed this year. Maybe not just formed, but just joined NAGES. So it's always a work in progress, it seems like. And that's just great for the U.S. Japan relations community, because the more Japan societies we have, the better the relationship could always be in the communities, just sharing knowledge about Japan. But this episode specifically is focusing on this aspect of Japan societies, big and small. I think we've said it many a times, but I went to the NAGES conference last year, which was an amazing experience. Never went before. Everyone was so nice and friendly. I was kind of intimidated because I was like, I'm just from a small volunteer organization.
Yeah.
And I am one of the youngest people here. But it was actually quite eye-opening, and I learned so much from so many different people. I grew to admire so many of them, especially the ones that spoke and had panels and workshops. It was amazing. But you notice the big and small.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've interacted with some folks from other ones. Like Kasha, for example, is very involved in I forget the official name for the organization in Michigan. The NAGES member that's located there, whichever Japan American Society that is. Apologies to that organization right now for me not knowing that name off the top of my head. But I know Kasha's very involved with that. We've had some interactions with Houston, considering proximity. They're pretty close. Same thing. I know our president, Mike, has worked closely with Pensacola, one of the Florida chapters. So It's very regionalized, and we keep to ourselves for the most part because we are small. We're volunteer. We do a good bit. Looking at our calendar, we have usually, I want to say, at least a handful of events a month. Maybe not at least. Maybe.
Yeah, we keep busy.
Yeah, we keep busy. Some months more so than others.
They're just not huge, elaborate events because, the differences, and we'll find this out in our episode, is that different Japan societies have different things to worry about and different things to, really cater to. Mm-hmm. And so what I found was the bigger societies very much run on, the business aspect of things. They're trying to cater to, businesses and sponsors. And
some of them are businesses. Some of those organizations are businesses.
They are. No, you're right. They are. Whereas we're small. And so as an all-volunteer small organization, we're more on the community grassroots level where we're doing cultural events and movie screenings and just a bunch of different smaller events.
And I would say too, and then we cover this too in the episode with our special guest today, who's Jennifer's going to introduce in a second. But we cover a lot of stuff where maybe we don't do it yet, but the fact that this network exists and that there are opportunities to collaborate, it had in the actual interview, you'll find that out, that it really had the gears turning in our own heads as we're hearing some of these ideas.
For sure.
That's not a bad idea. And that's the beauty of NAGES, right? And having all these other small, mid, and large organizations. And I don't mean mid as an insult. I mean mid-size, like a sedan. We are more of the
we are a Prius. We are a Prius. Beep beep.
I was gonna say a tricycle.
I was going to let us be an automobile at least. God.
Okay. All right. A scooter, a moped.
Oh, Jesus. But in a sense, you are right. We are so lucky to be part of NAGES because we're in this community of people, like-minded people, who are just as enthusiastic about this U.S. Japan relations stuff going on, that if we were to be inspired to do something bigger and greater and to kind of ease our way gently into the bigger, vaster sea, we have all these people that we can kind of go to and ask for guidance. This past year, Mike had friends from, I believe it was Southern Colorado Japan Society. They wanted to do like some kind of exchange. I think it was like a virtual exchange. I think it's going on right now, actually, as we speak.
Oh,
and
okay.
They wanted my advice because we did our exchange with Matsue. And so I gave them literally all of my material. I told them, what we did, how we did it. I don't know how much of that they actually used, but I was more than happy to give them all of my supplies and all my sheets and guides. So hopefully it was able to help. But yeah, I feel like they're there. The hand is open. And if we ever needed any kind of assistance, I feel like we could reach out to almost any of our Japan Society brothers and sisters, and they would be able to help us in whatever way they could.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, without further ado, I think we're ready to move on to our interview with Dr. Joshua Walker. He was the president, CEO. Do we call it CEO? Do we call it president?
I believe it's CEO. Yeah.
Okay, CEO of the Japan Society. So that is the Japan Society that is stationed in New York. It's the one that if you were to just type in Japan Society, you'll most likely get the New York division is the original one. And he has done so much work for that organization. And when we thought of this idea, we immediately drove right into having Josh on here for sure.
Yeah. And one other thing, too, when we did this interview, he was the president and CEO of the Japan Society in New Orleans since then. And we mentioned it to us after the interview ended. But since then, he's actually moved on to the U.S. Chamber, where he is now the Chief International Affairs Officer. So the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So he stepped out of the Japan Society role to move into this Chief International Affairs Officer role at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So first of all, congratulations to him. I didn't get a chance to tell him that during the episode. We didn't know what he was going into.
Well, he didn't tell us what he was going to do. He just said he was going to move to D.C. And I was like, what does that mean?
Right. So unfortunately, he is not the president and CEO of the Japan Society anymore, but the ideas that he shared with us during this episode and the conversation that we had is one of those things that you don't need to stay in that role to live and understand and really appreciate the input that he gave us.
Yeah,
so we were very thankful for him and his time. But This is a fantastic conversation. And I really think anyone who's involved with one of the organizations that is within the NAGES network or in any kind of Japan adjacent organization, I think you'll really appreciate what Joshua really brings to the table in this conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So let's jump into the interview. Let's go. Are you new to the crew? Yokoso. We hope you enjoy this episode. If you like what you hear today, then you'll really love our back catalog of episodes from earlier this season and previous seasons. We've had some incredible guests, like founder of Ikigai Connections, Kasha Lynch, helping discover how to start your Japan-related career today. Author Matt Alt uncovering the history of Nintendo. Former City Pop idol Yu Hayami talking with us about City Pop, and so much more. After you finish up this episode, hit that subscribe button or follow or whatever it is, and get notified when new episodes come out. Then while you wait for the new episode to drop, play catch up with the crew. But before you do any of that, let's dive into today's episode. This episode is going to be focused on Japan Society.
Yeah, for once.
Yeah. Not just Japan Society New Orleans, though. We're going to be taking a look at the Japan Society landscape in America and kind of how everything runs and comparing smaller volunteer organizations versus bigger, more prestigious and a much wider spread of, what they do So with us today, obviously we have Jennifer. Hey, Jennifer.
Hey.
And of course, our special guest for today, we have Joshua Walker of the Japan Society in New York. So Joshua, welcome to Krewe Japan Podcast.
Thank you. Well, I want to start by saying you have a lot of fans at both the Japan Society here in New York, but the broader Japan America societies. I've been hearing about you guys. I have heard a couple of podcasts, so I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, that's good to hear. I have no idea who listens to us. So
yeah, I have no idea either.
The fact that we have listeners is fantastic. So we're not just talking into a void. Great.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like, probably when you started this, Japan was important, but it was probably a niche thing. And now it's everywhere. So I think if you Google search Japan podcasts, you're popping up. And so you guys are one of the OGs and one of the first movers. So I think that's a great place to be right now.
Well, that's good news. Good news, Jen.
That's a compliment. I know.
All right. So what we do usually at the very beginning of our podcast, since we're New Orleans based, we typically have like a little icebreaker question. So I want to ask you, have you ever been to New Orleans before? And if you have, what's your favorite memory or experience? But if you haven't, what's the first thing you think of?
Yeah, so I have been to New Orleans. I think I've actually been there twice, but it was a long time ago. And so in both cases, I have the same distinct memory. And so you're going to have to correct that memory for me. But I think it's Jackson Square. There's this big cathedral and it's beautiful. And as a son of a pastor, as a missionary kid, there's something about in the center of New Orleans, right? Like New Orleans is known as the Big Easy. It's got the jazz, the nightlife. Not exactly right next to what you think of in terms of a church. And so to me, that juxtaposition was beautiful. And I just remember thinking about it. And of course, I was there a little bit after Katrina, and a lot of that resonates with me in terms of resiliency. And what stays with me is not necessarily like one area. I think a lot of people talk about Bourbon Street. I'm sure I went there, of course, beads, Mardi Gras, all that stuff. But to me, what stuck with me was really that sense of culture and music, food, faith, and community. So that's pretty special. And so as someone who's not from New Orleans, I have a lot of friends that are there. That's what sticks with me. And to me, given the work I do is very much in that space of bringing all those elements together. And of course, Japan is known for its resiliency. To me, it feels like New Orleans has that same vibe. So I'm pretty excited to get back to the Big Easy for the big National Association of Japan America Society conference, which I'm really excited to be coming back for.
Yeah, that's coming up this summer. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But just for the listeners' sake, the cathedral you're mentioning is actually St. Louis Cathedral. And you were right. It's right in the middle of Jackson Square.
In the middle of the chaos.
Yeah, right. Horse-drawn buggies taking you down the street,
Drunk people everywhere.
Yeah. Painters, artists. It's really a really fun area of the city. I mean, obviously the French Quarter. So that's like one of the things that attracts people to New Orleans the most. So that is a very iconic building and honestly, it's a great memory to have because it is one of those things that's very picturesque. And you can look at it different times of day. There was a crazy snow day. I want to say, was it 2 years ago?
Yeah,
last
2
year.
years ago.
Last year.
Was it?
Yeah,
Dang.
It was last year. And it just looked absolutely stunning in the snow. I've never seen it like that before. Obviously, we never get snow down here. It looks so cool at night, summer, winter, spring. It's just a really, really, really picturesque spot in the city.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would have loved the snow because I grew up in northern Japan and snow resonates with me. And you don't think of snow in New Orleans. So I think that would have been like my trifecta of perfect things like New Orleans, all that vibe, and then that cathedral and snow. So I got to come back next time you have a snowstorm. You got a plan for me.
Call it Snowmageddon 2025. It was insane. I think we got like 8 inches of snow, which is unheard of here. We're lucky if we get flurries.
Yeah.
And I say lucky, the city literally shut down. Like no one could go anywhere. Stores were closed.
Well, to get into your Japan background, what was the beginning of like your Japan story? And how did this relationship eventually shape into the direction of your career?
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny, right? Because when you look at someone like me, listeners may not be able to see a white, blue-eyed, 6'3" Virginian, but in many ways, my heart is very much shaped by Japan. I moved to Japan when I was 1. I grew up in the northern island of Hokkaido in Sapporo, where my parents were serving as Southern Baptist missionaries, something that New Orleans folks know very much about. For listeners who know Japan, the 4 main islands, everyone mostly talks about Honshu. That's where like Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka, Hiroshima, every major city. The 2 other islands that have some population is obviously Kyushu and Hokkaido. Hokkaido has 25% of the landmass, but only 5% of the population. And it's very densely populated around the Sapporo area. I think it's probably the fifth largest city in Japan. It's got about 1.5 million. And we're very famous because we had the 1972 Winter Olympics. We have the Sapporo beer that people know about. Everybody in Japan knows about Hokkaido. And increasingly and surprisingly, Americans are learning about Sapporo. I mean, here in New York, when I first moved here about 7 years ago, people didn't necessarily talk about it in the same way. Now in New York, there's a culture of ramen where everybody knows the regional specialties. And Sapporo is known for miso ramen that's really good. And so now I've got people who are members of Japan Society who come to me and don't just ask me where's the best ramen spot. They say, hey, we know you're from Hokkaido. We know you're a dosanko. That's a term used for somebody from Hokkaido. Where's the best Sapporo ramen spot? So it's crazy. Like people are really, really into Japan and learning every day about it.
We might have to get you back for a Hokkaido or a Sapporo episode just to talk about that, because I mean that could be a whole episode right there.
Yep, we love travel.
I mean, the same way you guys are so proud of New Orleans and the Gulf South, like I'm incredibly proud of Hokkaido, and I want people to know the regional abundance, because while many people are learning about Japan, there's so much more to discover than just Tokyo and Kyoto. And just like so much more than New York and Los Angeles to America, New Orleans has got to be on that list. So maybe in some ways we're kindred spirit between Hokkaido, Sapporo, and New Orleans and Louisiana.
Yeah.
Man, you have some good answers. Like, they're kind of perfect. Yeah, no, I definitely agree, because like I know I always tell people like who are traveling to Japan, it's great that you want to go to like Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka, but like also expand out, because everywhere is different. And every time I get the response, oh, why are you going to Japan again? You know, you've already been like so many times. It's like one trip is not going to help you. Like you need to go multiple times to experience all of it. So I definitely can relate to your answer with that one. Yeah, it's all very different, different experience. But how did this relationship eventually shape into the direction of your career?
For me, it was always part of who I was. I'm sometimes jealous of people's Japan stories because it's like a convert. Like you made a conscious choice to pick Japan. Japan picked me, right? Like I moved there when I was 1. I didn't have much say in the matter as a 1-year-old, but really Japan shaped me. And in some ways, my own Japan story has been a little bit of kind of growing up, feeling like Japan is a part of who you are. But when you grow up in Japan and you look the way I do, particularly in the part I grew up in where there's very few foreigners, I knew I wasn't Japanese from an early age, and my nickname growing up was the American. And in Japan, everything is about the insiders or outsiders, right? You're either a gaijin, so an outsider, or you're Japanese. And so I was always a gaijin. But because I spoke Japanese fluently, because I grew up in a northern rural part of Japan, I had a different experience. And so when I was 18, I came back to the States, went to college, went on, and I had a career that focused on international affairs. In many ways, I was a natural bridge builder as an international person. But in many ways, I didn't come back to Japan, connecting it to New Orleans, until after the big disaster of March 11th, 2011, 3/11, as we call it in Japan. And that really kind of the resiliency of the Japanese people in Tohoku region, the area that I care deeply about, brought me back. And so while I had professionally focused on the Middle East and Turkey, where I did a Fulbright fellowship and I worked for the State Department, my Japan story professionally began much later. So in many ways, Japan was my home. My parents have always lived there. I would go back for Christmas and New Year's. But when it came to the professional side, it was much later where I actually consciously chose Japan. And from that point onward, I've never looked back, because I just think that Japan is this amazing island of stability in a chaotic world. And it's also just a model of resiliency. And there's so much that we can learn to the world, and particularly in U.S. Japan relations and for this country in America.
You did mention the Japan Society. And so for listeners who may not be familiar with your organization, can you give us a sense of what it is, what it does, and the role it plays in New York and beyond? We want to make sure like people understand the scope of what you're leading for the Japan Society.
No, I appreciate it. And it's actually something I think the U.S. Japan community needs to do a better job of. Sometimes we take things for granted, and everybody in the U.S. Japan space happens to know the Japan Society because we were founded in 1907. We're coming up on our 120th year. We were founded at a time when Japanese were sending these major missions. A New York president who won a Nobel Peace Prize. No, not the one you're thinking about, but Teddy Roosevelt. He had settled the Russo-Japanese War, and there was a real interest in New York as the industrial hub of America and the world in some ways. and were watching this rising country, and they said, let's create something. And it's an American-based nonprofit that really served in some ways as a chamber of commerce between 1907 and then, of course, in 1941, when Pearl Harbor happened, we shut down for about a decade. But unlike a lot of other organizations that were taken over or were destroyed, we were mothballed because the people that were running it, the people on our board, I mean, our first president was Henry Taft, the same brother Taft, William Taft was the president. And so in many ways, there's this real historical resonance. And because New York was the financial center, America's first emissary to Japan, Townsend, was actually a New Yorker. And so there's a big connection between New York as a financial hub and industrial hub and Japan. And so Japan Society began in that way. And after the war, we came back even stronger because in 1952, John D. Rockefeller III, who had been serving in Japan on, all the different work that was there under occupation, came back and became our president. And it's one of the few institutions that the Rockefellers didn't found, but he was a president of. And so Japan Society is kind of the original in that case. And we went from being a chamber of commerce to being more of an arts and culture institution, because of his strong support. His house, the Japan House now, was donated to us. We're right across the street from the United Nations. When it was opened 55 years ago in 1971, it was an architectural wonder because it was the first time a Japanese architect had designed a building that had the Japanese minimalist functions in the world. And, the Prince Hirohito, the brother of the emperor, came all the way over because of that close relationship between the Rockefellers and the imperial family. So we took on a new life in this arts and culture world of having the first gallery and visual art space. So all the big names, Yayoi Kusama, Yoko Ono, Hiroshi Sugimoto, Shiko Munakata, I could go on, got their starts at Japan Society. And we played this really important role in New York in the art scene to do that. And of course, at the same time, from a business point of view, Sony, Toyota, all these major companies were coming of age and they were looking for organizations to support and to talk about the culture of Japan. And then finally, we created a language center, which teaches more Japanese language to Americans than anywhere outside of Japan. And so, we have these three pillars of arts and culture, business and policy and education. And we're a large organization that has our own building. We have our own endowment. We've got a large staff. And we're part of this larger network that we helped create as one of the original Japan societies.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. I was talking with our president, Mike Turner, recently, and he was having a dinner with, I want to say, someone from the consulate in Nashville. And they were asking, like, hey, why are you guys Japan Society of New Orleans and not Japan America Society? And it's because, similar to the New York one, we were founded, I think it was like 1928. So we're actually approaching our 100-year, our centennial. And because of that, there was pre-Japan America Society kind of like formations and as they spread about. And we've just kind of retained that name over across time. There's a big difference between, your organization and ours. As you were talking about, like all these people that you've had, historical figures just playing a big role in your organization. Here we are over here in New Orleans. We're 100%, we're very proud of it, but all volunteer, community-driven organization that we're doing a part in our Louisiana, New Orleans, the Gulf South, and just kind of connecting people to people and language and culture and where we can. But circling back to the larger NAGIS map, in your opinion, how do these smaller regional Japan America societies or Japan societies like ours fit into the broader ecosystem alongside with major institutions like yours? Is there more coordination between these organizations across the country that people expect?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. And I love the story about your name because, again, that's exactly right. Before World War II, if you were founded, you're the Japan Society. So I think there's probably about 6 of us. And the ones, mostly they're like ours, which are the biggest and largest. So you've got New York, Boston, San Francisco, Washington. And I didn't realize New Orleans was that, but it makes sense. We were all founded in the 1907 period. You guys were in the 1920s. And every regional Japan Society has its own flavor. There's a reason. There has to be a leader in your community that sees a need for this. And I think it goes to the larger point. NAGIS, the National Association for Japan America Societies, was founded about 50 years ago in the 1980s. And it was really in response to that question of how do we coordinate? Because again, if you're in New York, people unironically think about it as the center of the universe. Now, I'm not from New York. I have a hard time with that. When you grow up in Japan and you're instilled with humility, that's just not something you say to anyone. But when you've got the New York swagger and you're the Big Apple, you talk in a different way. And so I think in many New Yorkers' mind, like this is U.S. Japan because New York is America and it's the world. But the truth is, so much about America has changed in those 120 years. One of them is that America has always been a more decentralized place. America is a continental power. It is huge. Whereas in Japan, when you grew up in Hokkaido, you just know that everything's in Tokyo. The center of political gravity, financial gravity, cultural gravity, everything is in Tokyo. But in America, it's not the same. New York may be the financial capital of America, and DC is the political capital. But New Orleans could be the jazz capital, it could be the culture, it could be the food capital. Texas could be the energy capital. California could be innovation capital. And so I really think in terms of the U.S. Japan relationship, the work of the Japan societies in all of our places. I mean, I think NAGIS is up to 43 members right now. And the majority are just like you guys. They're volunteer organizations. You have like a big fundraiser. You do great community work, but you don't have paid staff. You don't have the resources that we have. And of course, we're at one end of the spectrum as a large organization that's endowed because you can't function in a place like New York City with 8 million people and much larger if you take the tri-state area, if you don't have resources and if you don't have the Rockefeller supporting you, if you don't have the imperial family, you're not going to do it. And I think about New York less as New York, but more as a global stage. And I think increasingly the NAGIS network is doing that for us, where there are a lot of things happening. And even in Ural's region, the Gulf, like Texas is booming. And when I look at some of those Japan America societies in Dallas and in Houston and in Austin and in San Antonio, they're doing great work because many Japanese companies and a lot of Japanese investment are finding their way there because here in New York, it's too expensive. A lot of the back office people are moving down there. So I think it's more incumbent on us than ever to work together. And I think there's a tension between the enthusiasm and excitement of the grassroots and the professional kind of strategy and coordination of professionals in the nonprofit space. And increasingly, it's not just the nonprofit space, but it's private sector and governments that we need to work together. And I think that's where Japan Society and Japan America Societies in our network is uniquely positioned. And I'm excited to be leading at this moment. But at the same time, I want to be respectful of where we've come from. But I think we got a long way to go.
I haven't really interacted on a national stage with a lot of the other Japan America societies, unfortunately. I've been more centralized here. I do interact with maybe a couple people. I think with we had some interaction. I personally have had interaction with Houston a couple times. But other than that, I mean, obviously today with you, but, other than that, I've been kind of like siloed. But I know Jennifer went to the conference last year, the national conference, and Mike goes every year. And I know we had a couple other officers who also attended. And everyone that goes tends to really do a great job of networking and trying to build those kind of relationships amongst each other. I'm looking forward to that this year, being that it's in town. I'll be able to be in person. I don't have to travel. That's usually the hard part with kids. Like, oh, they got to step away for, for a few days for fun for me. But not so much for my wife taking care of the kids, So, I'm really looking forward to that opportunity to really kind of learn from other organizations and see what else is going on out there.
And I think that is the value. And I think now that NAGIS is coming to town and New Orleans is hosting, it's a two-way street, right? Because I think there's actually probably a lot in New Orleans that has a Japanese flavor, whether we know it or not. I mean, jazz, we talk about, like, jazz is so popular in Japan.
It is.
I can give you so many examples. In New York, we like to think we're a center of jazz as well, particularly the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. And Japan Society partners with them on so much stuff. And so there are many synergistic areas that I would love to see New Orleans connected to. And then things like the World War II Museum that is so important in U.S. Japan history. I think there's a national stage that New Orleans is ready to play on the U.S. Japan space. And I think that's something that I hope that the conference will illuminate, because once you've made that connection, it's like when you meet somebody at a party. New York's a big city, but you meet that person, you start seeing them everywhere you go. And I think that's going to be the same experience. Once NAGIS comes to town and you get to know us, you can't get rid of us. So be careful what you wish for, Doug.
Well, we'll see how it goes. I'm ready for it. I'm ready for the opportunity.
And Joshua, you were talking about how your organization also has like sectors of arts and culture, policy work, language education, business exchange, and that's a lot of hats that, you're wearing. What are some of the programs or initiatives that the Japan Society that you're most proud of right now, and why do they matter in particular to like the US Japan relations?
Yeah, so let me give you an example from each of those sectors, but let me start with where we were just starting. We were talking about jazz. So late last year, I think in December, we hosted Haruki Murakami, probably the most famous Japanese author of all time. Like, he has a rabid fan base. He had not been to
Mm-hmm.
New York in close to 6 years. By the way, he's a huge jazz fan. And what we did was we partnered with Town Hall, which has its own history with jazz and Thelonious Monk and all these things. And so we had him come and receive the Japan Society Award, where he made some amazing remarks about the role of Japan, his own history and culture with America. And he read some of his work, and we set those pieces to jazz. And it was just one of those transformative, only in New York moments. And I was really proud to see that come to life, because it was something that people lined up throughout the streets to see. It got reported in all the top outlets. And it was just really cool to see that Japan Society could do this, because he could have gone anywhere. You know, he obviously could have gone to Carnegie, he could have gone to the Met, but he chose us, and we were able to do this amazing partnership. So that's one in terms of the arts and culture space. You know, very recently, we just hosted the Minister of Finance, Minister Katayama, who came through town after she was in DC for a visit with the IMF World Bank. She stopped by New York specifically to give a speech at Japan Society. And this is the first female finance minister working for the first female prime minister. And her message was so clear, right? It was like, not only is Japan back, but we need your help. We need you, finance community. We need you, Japanese companies in New York, to step up with us. And she had this funny and very amazing analogy where the day she was speaking happened to be the 100th anniversary of Yankee Stadium being inaugurated. And on that day, evidently, Babe Ruth hit a home run. And so she ended by saying, I'm pretty small, not like Babe Ruth, but since I'm the first female finance minister, help us hit a home run together. And I think that level of connectivity and reach out to the grassroots and to our community was pretty special. And I was really proud of that. It happened because we had met with her a couple of months earlier in Japan, and we simply extended the invitation, and she took us up on it. And finally, on the education space, you know, one of the things that I'll go back a little further to is when I came to Japan Site in 2019, one of the big problems I had was we had so much interest of students learning Japanese that we couldn't accommodate the demand. Now, this was a couple months before the pandemic, and COVID shut everything down, with the Department of Health making New York City impossible to navigate. And we went virtual at that point. And now we have more people learning on Zoom than in our building. And we have people learning all around the world. We've got students from Kazakhstan and India and London, et cetera. And I think I'm really proud of that, because the Japan Society way of teaching Japanese is really student specific. And there's levels, like you can go through like 11, 12 levels of Japanese. It's not just an intro course. And we were able to scale that virtually. And now we've got initiatives to try to do basic Japanese in modules, and doing things that business travelers can use. And, you know, there's just so much interest in Japanese culture and language that, you know, it's anime and food and everything else that's there is doing. So I'm really proud that we have this amazing history, but we're keeping up with the times. And from Haruki Murakami and jazz to literary to the finance ministry to education at its grassroots and really equipping the next generation to learn, we're doing all that, and we're meeting this moment. So I'm pretty excited about what we're doing. But of course, I want to be able to scale that across. Like, how can I help the Japan Society of New Orleans? How can I help the National Association to do what we're doing and follow that example, which takes resources and it takes energy and it takes commitment from people like yourselves.
Yeah, and you actually kind of led into our next question perfectly. You know, the world itself is a very different place from when a lot of these organizations were founded. You know, yours back in 1907, I think you said?
Yep,
That's right.
1907.
Then other, you know, smaller Japan America societies across that were after the war. With cultural content now being so accessible online, like your language classes, for example, and Japan's global footprint being bigger than ever, you know, what are some other roles that you see organizations like your organization, obviously, but maybe other smaller organizations, how should they evolve with the changing climate of how culture and content is accessed? I mean, obviously, we do a lot of posting on social media. You know, I feel like that's a big entry point for a lot of people. You know, what kind of opportunities are out there for smaller organizations that can kind of leverage some of these evolving technologies and media to really connect with audiences and people who are interested in Japan?
Let me start with an encouragement. I think exactly what you said. Social media, being able to connect is easier than ever. Like, we all are carrying the power in our phones to be connected to anywhere in the world. There's no barriers anymore. At the same time, I think those screens are making it more difficult to go deep. It's easy to go wide. So if you want to learn something on YouTube, you want to learn about Japan, but do you know that that content is actually truthful? Do you know that AI is not giving you disinformation? And so you need validators and you need people that will allow you to kind of step beyond and to have that connection, right? And so I think in some ways I'm jealous of societies like yours because you don't have a very high overhead. Like I have to raise so much money just to be able to have a building in New York and pay for a team of dedicated people before I can even get to reaching other people. Whereas you guys, like everything that you're doing is direct reach. The problem, of course, is most people aren't going to pay for virtual content. So it's great that you have the content, but like who's going to pay for it? And it costs money, right? It takes real resources to make that happen. And so it's kind of a chicken or egg problem, which is yes, Japanese content has never been more popular, but who's able to monetize that? I mean, I look at it a little bit like it's so easy to connect, but like, are you actually talking to a human? Like, think about how hard it is to talk to a human being when you're buying anything these days, right? Like, if you want to buy it online, it's super easy. If it's on Amazon, it's at a touch of a button, you can get it. But if you have questions about that, if you need to talk to a human being, you can't go anywhere anymore. Like, and I think that is the beauty of Japan, where there still is very much that culture of omotenashi, anticipating the needs of your customer, really being customer oriented that we have lost in America because we're all about efficiency and like, okay, maybe only one person out of 100 wants to ask a question. So just make it a click button and you can order it. And so I think where Japan societies can play a big role is not only being an entryway and kind of people that get interested because of something else, because of food or anime or culture, but we can be the guidepost to say, hey, let us help you along that Japan journey. And whether it's you want to learn Japanese language or whether you're interested in the business opportunity and the startup culture that might, you could have a market in Japan as one of the largest markets out there. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done. And I think the more we can partner together and kind of build on the network and the foundation that's out there, the better off we will be, because it's going to be hard to start from scratch and rebuild everything. And there's so much good work that's out there. It's just not all being coordinated. To give you one specific example, there's a lot of content out there, but most of that content is being controlled by other people, right? And so the people who are the creators, whether it's an anime artist or whether it's a chef at a restaurant, they're not making the money. It's a little bit like Shohei Ohtani, right? One of the greatest baseball players of all time, far exceeds Babe Ruth. He's making a lot of money. I'm not sorry for him. At the same time, think about how much money the Dodgers organization is making just off of the sales and the tourists that are coming to see him. And so we got to find a way of the Japanese and more people working in that space to be able to be incentivized. That's what a capitalist market is about. And I worry that some of those pieces are not in full alignment, particularly at the grassroots, where everybody wants our content, but nobody wants to pay for it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, smaller organizations like us also finding the bodies and that have the time and energy to put the effort into developing some of these programs too. Because like you said, especially the language program that you just did, to scale it to the level that you have takes people who can develop curriculum, teachers, all these different things that smaller organizations may not have that opportunity. But if there's opportunities to leverage other, network and say, what are you guys doing? How is this working for y'all? You have any tips? And then just even maybe one idea can help get a smaller program off the ground, and help it kind of get on a trajectory to start. And then once it gets some momentum, who knows where it goes?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
There's a lot happening right now, like government wise and policy level things, especially for U.S. Japan relations. But a lot of the real work, as we've been discussing this whole entire time, kind of happens at the community level. How important is that grassroots, people to people side of the relationship? And how does the Japan Society intentionally nurture that? Because I know you're saying before, I don't know if we actually recorded it when you said it, but you were like, oh, I miss the grassroots kind of things. So how does the Japan Society try to get into that?
This is such a key point, and I think it really intersects with my own professional calling, right? Like I've worked in the U.S. government, at the State Department, at the Pentagon. I'm a creature of Washington in some ways, and yet here I am as the president of Japan Society. And that's very intentional because it feels to me like increasingly Washington is broken, and it feels to me that the relationships between the U.S. and Japan that historically have been driven by the president and the prime minister, if that continues, it's not going to be good for either country, right? Like the more it gets politicized, the more it gets personalized into personalities of this president or that prime minister, the less we, the people, are going to be beneficiaries of it. And I think that's where, as America turns 250 this year as a democracy, and as Japan thinks about what its role in the future will be and what the relationship between the U.S. and Japan that has been overshadowed by the end of World War II and the effects of World War II, of a defeated nation that was occupied and was kind of in a subordinate position of big brother, little brother. In the world we're living in today, Japan has a lot more opportunity and access than America in some ways, right? If you go anywhere in the world, everybody is consuming Japanese content. No one is targeting Japan in the way that America is increasingly being targeted. And particularly when you're a big superpower like the United States or China, everybody's looking for alternatives. And so if you travel throughout Southeast Asia, the Middle East, etc., when I tell people I'm from Japan, things flip. Like instead of seeing me just as an American where they're defensive and want to tell me why we've been the big bad bully for a long time, they all of a sudden want to talk to me about Dragon Ball. They want to talk to me about Final Fantasy. And again, I think there's a human element there that Japan itself and we in the U.S. Japan community have not been able to fully leverage there. And I think when you talk about Japan society and Japan societies, let me give you a specific anecdote. So this week, we're hosting the Japan Day Parade. There'll be a big parade along Central Park. And that's actually only been going on for about 5 or 6 years now. But it's really a tribute to 150 years ago when the samurai paraded down Broadway. And it created such a frenzy of New Yorkers that they were like, what's happening? We've never seen these guys dressed up this way with swords and walking in dresses or whatever. And, nowadays, like, I see people in cosplay. I see anime people everywhere. And it's like normal. It's like Halloween every day in certain parts of New York, just like when you go to Shibuya, right? And it may not be like that in New Orleans, but certainly during Mardi Gras, you know what that's about. And so I think, how do you harness that in an environment where things are so politicized? So last month, the Prime Minister of Japan came to Washington for a visit. And it happened to take place at the exact same moment as the national cherry blossoms were happening, right? Now, if you live in Washington, D.C., one of the key moments of the year is this National Cherry Blossom Festival. And I lived in Washington for a long period of time, and every year it got bigger. I went this year as the president of Japan Society, and also because I happened to be there during the time of the Prime Minister's visit to the White House. And we had an event at the Kennedy Center, the Trump Kennedy Center, depending on how you want to frame that. And it was interesting because we were one of the few events that could take place because we were having a Japanese dance performance. There was a Japanese cultural fair around that. We celebrated with people from the Trump administration, people from Democrats on the Hill, Supreme Court justices. We were able to bring people together in a way that no one else could do. And the Sakura Matsuri, the Cherry Blossom Festival that our sister organization, the Japan America Society of Washington, does, brought out 60,000 people to be able to celebrate Japanese culture. And when I watched the relationship, and remember the big headline out of the visit between the prime minister and president wasn't what was going on in Iran. It wasn't the economic deal. It was that the president of the United States brought up Pearl Harbor, which was a bit embarrassing to those of us from that period of time. And so for me, the highlight was watching our community come together and celebrate what unites us and not what divides us, because that question to the president and also the prime minister's behavior is a polarizing moment where if in the midterms, the Democrats come back and there's a new president in 2028, they're going to remember Japan and the way it dealt with Trump in particular. And given the strong personalities, like, it's not my job. I serve at the pleasure of my members, and I'm going to work with whoever the president and whoever the prime minister is. But it is so polarizing in Washington now. It's like a sports team where you have to be on one side or the other. There's no middle ground. And so I really think we, the people, and as society members, we have a real role to play here, not just in our democracies, but in how we are able to take that enthusiasm and connection. I mean, people's interest in Japan gives people a point of connection. And it's like, oh, you speak Japanese. Oh, you're interested in tea ceremonies. You do martial arts. Like, there's a connectivity there that in the same way throughout American culture, whether it was going to the same church or going to the same synagogue, it allows you to connect. And I think we need more points of connection in a world that's more and more disconnected, where, like, yeah, you can research Japan on your screen, but you're not going to experience it. Whereas when you come to the Japan Society, you can guarantee you're going to get something that will transport you and be part of that connection between the US and Japan.
That's so important, man. Like what you were saying, and you were talking about like grassroots connections, like people connections. And really it starts on the ground and forming those small bonds. You never know, like those small bonds, you put a bunch of little small bonds together, suddenly you've got a community, multiple communities that may be connected because of those bonds. I was a former Jet, and that was one of the things, I lived in Fukushima for 3 years. And I was not in a very rural town, but it was, you go 10 minutes out, you're in the hills, in the mountains. So I was close enough to rural, but also in a town where it's pretty big, that I was meeting people and I was maybe the first foreigner they ever met. Or actually, maybe not ones they've seen or met, but first one they interacted with as a person to person. So, that kind of opportunity, you don't think about it in the moment, but like you look back and you're like, man, I don't know what happened after that moment, but like maybe you shaped them, if it was a positive experience, Unfortunately, there's negative experiences too that happen that, can shape it negatively. But those kind of positive experiences really can move things forward on an international level. And I mean, that's such an important thing that you said, like bringing people together is really the goal, right?
Yeah, let me make one more point. Sorry, I've got long-winded answers, but you have such great questions. I want to share. There's so much I have to share about this that I think is relevant to the world. Think about sports and what a unifier that has become, right? In the past, you're like, oh, Japan is kind of quirky. It's got sumo, it's got karate. Like now it's like, no, America's national pastime, the best players in the world happen to be Japanese. And whether you're watching the World Baseball Classic, that's become like a must-watch TV because of the way that Otani went up against Trout last time around, and this time how Team USA and Team Venezuela did. Think about the way we root for people, right? So I'm here in New York. I go to Yankees game. My son is a diehard Yankees fan. When we go to Yankee Stadium and I go and watch the Dodgers, a lot of the fans are screaming obscenities and are nasty towards the other team because that's the way we root for something. We attack the other side. Like, I want to tell you that my team is the best, and it's negativity. It's all about how Otani sucks and words I can't use on air, right? On the Japanese side, the way baseball works is there's an orderly kind of fight song that each side has, and they cheer for their team, and they have specific songs and encouragement for every single player that are unique.
Yep.
And then the other side goes. How beautiful is that? And what a metaphor, right? A Yankee Stadium, when people leave, usually they're either really high and happy that their team won, but they leave all the trash and they just leave. And all these beer guys who are not particularly attractive are like stomping around trying to sell you overpriced stuff. In Japan, you don't leave without cleaning the area you leave from. And the girls that come through, the beer girls, are selling you things that are cheaper and more convenient in the stadium than outside. What a different world that is. And when you think about how Japan operates and the social harmony that allows that to happen, there's a lot we can learn. And so even from a sports point of view, and even from a baseball point of view, where America is the dominant baseball power, although not so much anymore, looking at the World Baseball Classic, and then even looking at the way we root for things, which is more about antagonistic and anti and negative. What about learning from like the ability to cheer on your team? And so in many ways, I look at my role and our role collectively as Japan societies as being a collective fight song to help our Japanese friends realize they have a lot of value in the world. And just because we're America and we're a superpower doesn't mean we understand everything. Not our trains don't work as well. Our cell phones, certainly our toilets are not as cool as the Japanese. And there's just so much that any American that visits Japan will appreciate.
I need a Japanese toilet so bad.
I have one.
Do you?
Yeah, Jonathan, when we came back from our honeymoon, Jonathan was like, we have to get one. So now we have one.
I need a Toto. Anyway.
I can hook you up. I know people.
All right. Well, we'll have to talk about that offline. Get them to be a podcast sponsor. All right. So really quick, to circle it back to something we kind of mentioned briefly, well, maybe not briefly, we mentioned a few times at this point, but one thing we as an organization here locally in New Orleans, we're really excited about is the National Japan America Society Conference that's coming to New Orleans. We're hosting it at the end of July this year, 2026. And, we're partnering with Japan America Society of Northwest Florida to host. And this is the first time a national conference has been hosted by an all-volunteer society. Usually it's hosted by bigger societies that can kind of leverage it. This time it's little guys like us that we're going to be doing
we're trying.
Unfortunately, we have a good network with, NAGIS's organization too. They're really kind of, they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting right now.
Yeah, they're definitely helping.
But we're going to definitely be helping kind of facilitate some of the conversations with after parties and dinners and where to go and all those kind of things. We're working on that. So for people who don't know what the national conference is, can you explain what it is and why it matters to the organizations across this country? And we've kind of touched on it just as a networking event, but what else can people get out of it? And then also, what does it mean to bring it to a city like New Orleans?
Yeah, I mean, the NAGIS annual conference is the largest event that NAGIS puts on. And as you mentioned, there is a professional staff. It's a small but mighty staff. By virtue of being the Japan Society president, I'm also on the executive committee of NAGIS and was voted there. So I've been to pretty much every one. Last year, we had it in Lexington, Kentucky. We've had it in many places. Actually, New York Japan Society hosted it almost immediately after I came in as president and after COVID, because I wanted to show the importance of how important this national network is. And while we may be very New York centric and specific with our programming and events there, I actually think the work of the grassroots and organizations like yours are so important. And so I'm really excited to see you guys hosting with the Northern Florida group. I think it's really important for it to be successful, because if it doesn't succeed, then I think it goes back to a model of only the bigger organizations that can host it and use it for their own purposes. Whereas I think one of the great things about you guys hosting is, number one, I think New Orleans is just an amazing backdrop and an amazing venue for a host. Like, people love going to New Orleans, not just for the Super Bowl or for Mardi Gras, but for a lot of other things. And I think especially if you can find those synergies of people that love Japan, whether it's in the jazz scene or the food scene or the artistic scene. I happen to know a lot of those people in New Orleans, and whether it's the New Orleans Art Museum that has an entire wing dedicated to Japanese art, because Dr. Kurt Gitter, who unfortunately passed away recently, who was our award winner at Japan Society last year, because he shared a connection between New York and New Orleans. And I happen to be very close to him and his family. He was always talking about the role of New Orleans and how important that was, and how much he wanted to see Japanese culture and art go in New Orleans, because New York, we have a lot of that stuff. And so now it's going beyond that to places like the Gulf South, and to places like Louisiana, New Orleans, and Florida. So what the National Association Conference does is it brings everybody from that world together, and also brings a lot of people from Japan, and it brings the top companies, the top thinkers, people like myself that don't have the opportunity to go as often for U.S. Japan things, because this is the first time, as far as I'm aware, that New Orleans has had something of this scale. And so I think it's really an opportunity to celebrate the U.S. Japan community together. And I think it's an opportunity for your society to put yourself on the map in a literal way, because it's hard if you don't have the funds to bring in speakers and bring in these people. They're all coming for this conference. And so I think in some ways, in a very Japanese way, by being a great host and being able to welcome people and have those right venues and areas that you as host are the only people who know, because you're like, hey, I know the tourists go to this place for the beignet, but here's the real place that locals go. And here's where, if you want the best food that's not going to be totally crowded because it's got overpriced big names, but this is where the locals eat, this is what the locals are doing. I think that's what's going to create the synergies. And my hope is that once people visit, they come back more often. But I think it's really an opportunity, just like New York is, of being a global stage, for New Orleans to play that role. And I think we're all very excited to see this be successful.
Yeah, I know we're very excited for this event.
Very much.
I was talking with our president last night about it, and there's a lot of cool things in the works, I think, that are going to be happening for this that are not finalized and ironed out, so I can't share anything just right now. But it sounds like there's some cool stuff coming up that I think people will get a really good feel for the city. I know Andy from Nagus has already shared out like a tip sheet. I don't say tip sheet. It sounds like very work related, but kind of like a recommendation list of like places to check out, things to do when in town.
Yep. I added to that.
Oh,
I
you
had
did?
2
Okay.
recommendations. Yep.
I didn't, unfortunately. I was too busy.
Shame.
I missed out.
But I mean,
yeah.
one more thing to emphasize is that connecting the dots to the geopolitical moment we're in. The Japanese ambassador to the U.S., Shigeo Yamada, who happens to be a good friend, has really prioritized Nagus. And when you look at where he's traveling, I mean, he's got 50 states he's kind of overseeing, and you've got like 14 or 15 consulate generals that are doing great work, including here in New York. But I think that also gives them an opportunity, and it gives the ambassador a focus, because then it's like, okay, there's a reason to bring the ambassador to town, right? Because historically, it only happens when there's like a huge investment and there's like a big ceremony of some sort. And naturally, the cities that are bigger, whether that's New York or Houston or Chicago or LA, they're going to get the attention. And New Orleans, which is an absolutely powerhouse as a city, but doesn't have that same population flow, and certainly doesn't have the level of investment from Japan that your neighboring states do, including both Texas and others. And so I think there's an opportunity there to kind of open the eyes of people. And I think for a local perspective, I think people in Louisiana, New Orleans should know there's opportunities, and there's sister cities relationships, there's sister state relationships. Like, every local official and, business leader should be involved in Nagus to say, okay, how can I help people understand that America is bigger than just New York and Washington and California? Like, it's not just the flyover states. Like, there's great stuff happening here in New Orleans related to energy and innovation and things that maybe New Orleans is not on the consciousness for. It's not just the jazz and the food, which is great tourist stuff, but from a business perspective, this is a great gateway to the rest of this part of America that is an important market for Japanese companies.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a big highlight of the conference, like you said,
Yeah.
because I think that New Orleans is a great convention town, great tourist town, great food town, great jazz town. But there's other things that are they're there to offer, So it will be a good opportunity to highlight some of that. Speaking of highlighting things, though, there's something of yours we want to highlight that you recently have released a book called Japan Beyond the Genkan. And, Genkan is such a rich metaphor just to build around. It's like the threshold between the outside world and what's inside, So what's your book about? Like, now, you don't have to obviously tell us everything. We want people to read it, but what's going on with your book? Let everyone know about it.
Yes, thank you. I love it. I'm very good at self-promotion, obviously, but I always appreciate when people ask me a question like that. Here, you can see it right here. Your readers, your listeners can, but you got it exactly right. Japan Beyond the Genkan. I'm going to read the subtitle because it will resonate with what we've been talking about. An insider's guide to the soft power, strong markets, and social harmony of America's most important Asian ally. I think I say it all in the title, right? So you can just read the title and just check it out, and you might be okay with it, but it will be out everywhere. You can get it wherever books are sold. Look, as someone who grew up in Japan and has always been connected, I didn't think I'd be writing a book like this in 2026. But I think as we entered the second year of the second term of the Trump administration, this message that I have been talking about of the U.S. Japan relationship needing to go beyond the president and prime minister after 80 years of World War II and in the memory, it's time for the next generation to step forward. And I think everyone's always been interested in Japan from the 1980s because of the size of the Japanese economy and Toyota and all these big names that have come out. And then recently, everyone's become really interested in the soft power of Japan and its anime and food and all the things that work so well. But I think the glue that brings that all together is the harmony piece. And I think that element is one that it's hard to really explain. And you can appreciate, having lived in Japan, both of you, and traveled, this concept of a genkan is pretty unusual. And to somebody in Japan, it makes complete sense. But to an American, when you walk into someone's house, you're pretty much in their house and you walk in with your shoes on and you can see their living room. You just kind of go in. In a Japanese house, there's a genkan, which is a threshold. And you first have to transition and take your shoes off and put on the slippers. And then there's usually a screen that opens and you are directed to where you go next. And it's very rare. In America, you meet somebody for the first time. Oh, we'd love to have you over sometime. You guys should come. Like, I meet you guys for the first time. I invite you to my house. That's totally normal. That is not normal in Japan because the idea is the houses are smaller. Things are more kind of divided. There's certain ways things are done. And there's a certain harmony that goes towards that. So a lot of Americans, when they visit Japan or learn about Japan, they're only getting one version of it. They're getting the Genkan version, where Japanese want you to see only the very nice Shodo calligraphy or the Ikebana flower there. And so what I'm trying to do is help Americans understand there's so much more there. And I go through examples of many Japanese companies that have embedded themselves in the lives of Americans, not just Mario Brothers, not just things that you see everywhere from Pokemon and Pikachu to other things, but they're just there. And we just take it for granted now because Americans, in some ways, Japan is no longer this weird place. It's actually just a part of it. I mean, to give you a perfect example, my own kids, when we go to the Macy's Day Parade here in New York, they have these big floats and they have all these characters. And so, of course, I'm excited about Garfield and Snoopy and Smokey the Bear. My kids have no idea what those are. Like, that is not a cultural thing that resonates with them at all. That's like old school. Only my parents understand that. What resonates with them is Pikachu. What resonates with them is Luffy and Goku from Dragon Ball. And when I say, oh, do you know that's from Japan? They're like, no, it's not. That's from America. They speak in English. And I'm like, no, they're actually originally from Japan. And they're like, no, that's our friend. And so, obviously they're kids of the President of Japan Society. So you would imagine that they would have more connectivity than the average, but I don't think that's an unusual experience. And so I want Americans to fully appreciate the abundance of Japan. And what's interesting is this book in English just came out. My Japanese book, which was a bestseller, came out back in January of this year. And it's actually, the Japanese book was originally going to be a translation of this book, but actually I don't think Japanese need to learn about going beyond the Genkan. What the Japanese were interested in, the publisher asked me to focus in on, is that concept of going beyond the presidency, going beyond the government, which is not to be negative about any particular president or prime minister, but it's basically saying, look, the way our democracies are evolving, you need to explain the importance of alliances. Like, why do we even need an alliance with Japan anymore? What's the value proposition of that? Can I, as a person here in New Orleans or in New York, get value out of that? And the answer is absolutely. Japan is the largest investor in the United States in almost every state, almost every city. And that is huge for us. If for whatever reason we cut ourselves off from the rest of the world, we're going to pay a higher price for that. And in some areas like national security, that might make the sense. But a lot of people love Japanese cars. People love Japanese watches. People love Japanese whiskey, you name it. And so that's part of the world we live in. And I want to be able to explain that both to an American audience and also to a Japanese audience, to try to explain why this relationship matters and why we've got to be involved. And we can't just leave it to the government or to DC and Tokyo anymore. We need New Orleans and New York to be present there.
Wow. You knew how to explain that so well. I'm so wow. Joshua, you just know how to say things.
I guess that's what New York does. It makes you talk very quickly and present things. I'll do it in Japanese as well, and then it's even more confusing to everyone.
I do like the title of your book. Like Doug said, the metaphor of the Genkan. I really, really appreciate that.
Well, I'm really excited. I hope you guys get a copy. If not, then at the conference, I certainly will have some. And I'd love for you guys, as fellow travelers in this world, to get a chance to read it and tell me, because I think in some ways, that's who I wrote this for, right? I wrote it for your listeners because you're the people that I think in some ways don't necessarily need to learn everything. You've got a lot of knowledge about Japan. But after my 45 years on this earth, I want to kind of give that and pay that forward so that other people can use that knowledge and equipment. And, whether it's the Dasai factory here in New York where they're making Japanese sake and, competing at the highest level, where now sake is like wine and everybody wants to understand the differences of it. I just think it's come of age, and I hope this book will resonate. And I hope it's not just like a one-hit wonder. I think the Japanese book, because of the nature of the book, was more kind of in this moment in time. I'm hoping this is more timeless because, again, some of the books I love and appreciate most about Japan are very academic and historic, like Embracing Defeat by John Dower, or even Bending Adversity by David Pilling, my friend who's a journalist. And I kept on being asked as a president, like, what's a good book to read when I go to Japan? What's one thing that will let me know everything about Japan? And it's impossible to condense everything into one book, but at least this is one life lived on the intersection of U.S. Japan, as one person that now is the president of Japan Society, who has been in government and who has lived his whole life on that intersection, can pay it forward to someone that wants to embark on that journey together and can find different entry points, which I hope there's something for everyone in the different chapters that are there.
Well, I look forward to reading it. I can't promise when I'll read it. I have a big stack of books that I say, I can't wait to read this. And
well, I'll be able to read it because
Jen's
I run our book club.
Well, there you go. Then you're an expert and professional. Doug is too busy for everything. Maybe you can listen to the audiobook. That's the way I do things too.
That needs to be how I have so many books on my shelf. Like you could see over here on this other side of my room, there's like books and books and books, and I maybe read. I'm like, I want to read that so bad. I just don't have the time, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
But I will. I promise you.
Something you definitely gotta make time for.
Is there an audiobook for this?
There's going to be an audiobook that's coming out. So, and it will be read. The only problem is it's read in my melodious voice. And sometimes I can't stand listening to myself. But hey, if it's okay on the podcast and that's your profession, then like maybe you'll appreciate it more. You can also, you can speed me up or slow me down depending on what you want. So, you can go at double speed to get through quickly.
There you go.
Well, Joshua, when you think about where U.S. Japan relations are headed over the next decade, what gives you the most optimism? And where do you think organizations like Japan Society, big or small, have the biggest role to play in shaping that kind of future?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to sound a little cheesy or perhaps even a little cliche, but
we
it's
love
the
cheese.
Truth. No, I mean, like, I really think it's you guys. And I think it's your members in New Orleans. It's the Japan Society in New Orleans. It's the Japan Society here in New York. That's what gives me hope, because I'm not that hopeful about the state of our world, right? Like, I do not think the world in the next 10 years is going to be entering a place where everything's going to be okay. Like, I'm worried about Taiwan. I'm worried about U.S. Japan relations. I'm worried about how politicians are going to respond in populist ways. So that's not what gives me hope. I think we're going to have to live in a world that is increasingly more and more challenging. Things are going to, in terms of cycles, like whether it's weather patterns, like, Katrina being a once in 100 year, the Fukushima earthquake being once in 100 years, I think that stuff's going to happen every 10 years now. And that is not something that I'm optimistic about. But the way we, the people, respond to that, and how America's been doing it for 250 years, how the Japanese have been doing it much longer from an ancient civilization, it gives me great hope, right? And I do think that part of that is equipping each other to deal with the new world, right? In the same way that our kids are growing up in a way that I didn't grow up. Like, I didn't have a Facebook account going to college. Like, God forbid there had been Facebook when I was in college, because some of the dumb things I did could have been easily captured. I mean, talk about New Orleans and like Mardi Gras. Can you imagine these days, like Girls Gone Wild or whatever that stuff was back in my day is literally everywhere. And like, how, as I think about my daughter growing up, I'm like, oh my goodness, like that's a horrible world. How can I protect her for it? But she's going to learn to be able to do things better. And, my kids from a young age know how to swipe on the iPad and do things that I don't even know my own iPhone can do. And so I think we evolve as human beings and we learn. But I think one of the lessons from Japan, and I think something I want Japan society to take with them, is this philosophy of intentionality. In Japan, there's this idea of do. So whether it's Bushido, the way of the warrior, or whether it's Chado, the way of the tea, or even Yudo, the way of the bath, there is an intentionality behind everything. And I think specifically since COVID, Americans and the world have been searching for that. I think there's a reason that Japan is so popular right now. And I don't expect that to last forever. I don't think that we're going to be talking about this in 10 years' time, but we are in peak Japan right now. And there is a moment of opportunity right now that we as individuals that have been blessed to have a connection to Japan will allow us to equip our neighbors and those around to find the best of Japan and be intentional. Because I don't think Japan does everything right. I don't think America does everything right. But when we do it together as the U.S. Japan, we do it better together. And I think that is the way I want our lives to be lived. And so while there will be challenges, there are inevitably going to be things that are going to be problematic in blue states and red states and all in between. But like at the end of the day, I think we can unite around not just the red, white, and blue, but the red and white, bringing Japan into that conversation.
Fantastic. Totally agree. Totally agree. And I think that,
Mm-hmm.
again, keeping those connections and building them at a entry level for people, like it goes a long way, just education. I mean, it's people getting educated and
Yeah.
wanting to be educated. I think that's another thing too, willingness to accept things. And I think building those positive experiences and relationships early on at a personal level allows people to be more receptive to new things and to want to learn and to want to say, oh, that's how someone else does it. Okay. And then move on and grow from that. I mean, that's how people in general grow.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're trying to do here at Japan Society of New Orleans, at least on the grassroots level, is like really trying to get our community educated on why the relationship is so important. As you say, it's not just the Gokus and the Pikachus.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Well, before we wrap up, thank you again so much for giving us some time and giving us about an hour to sit down and talk to you about this. Because again, I follow you on LinkedIn, I follow you at Japan Society, and I see all the posts and things that you do, and I'm like, that's incredible. And part of me is like, I wish we could do something like that. And we've kind of tried to, I don't want to say emulate, but like we do see some ideas, and we're like, that's a cool idea. I think there's opportunities for us to leverage. Not directly or anything, like say, hey, give us your idea, give this guy's email to us so we can reach out to him. But I think there's ways that we can connect, and that you with Japan Society have opened opportunities up to smaller organizations like us. So I'm looking forward to meeting you in the summer. But before we wrap up completely, I want to give you an opportunity to let people know where they can find you and follow you. I know you have, your LinkedIn, which you're very, very, very active on LinkedIn. That's where I see most of your content. But if you have other places where you post, please feel free to let people know. And then anything else you may have coming up in the near future that you want to let people know about.
Well, awesome. Let me just start with the easy stuff. You can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram mostly at Dr. Joshua Walker. When you have a name like Joshua Walker, you've got to come up with a distinguishing factor. And so I have to use the doctor because I have a PhD there. And then, of course, with the beyondthegenkan.com, that's where a lot of my book content will be living. I think one of the cool things about writing a book is it's a message and it's a kind of a manifesto of the way I think. And I think, Doug, to go to your point, one of the greatest parts of my job is being able to be part of conversations like this. And I think, obviously there's a lot of management, there's a lot of things that need to be done here in New York. But when I get outside and when I get to go to the NAGIS conference, those are some of the greatest things. And I think serving on the NAGIS board, seeing the leadership of Andy as the president, Emma as our chair, there's just so much there. And I think it's an opportunity for all of us, because I think, you guys aren't doing this because you're professional staff. You're doing it because you have a love of Japan. And if I can help in any way with that, I think you should be trying to leverage. Don't be Japanese about it. Ask for help, right? I think one of the biggest challenges we have in the community is we just kind of assume that, oh, Joshua must be too busy. Well, it turns out Doug is pretty busy too. So if you need a connection, you're like, hey, if Haruki Murakami loves jazz, we'd love to host him. Now, of course, if you can't figure out how to pay for his airfare and you can't figure out a venue and all that stuff, like you have to be realistic. And it's kind of my job to be that realistic thing. So you can imagine a lot of people are much pushier than you, particularly here in New York. And so they're always asking for the email address of Haruki Murakami. They're asking for Shohei Otani's interpreter's email, etc. And like, I may or may not have that information, but I do know that if we're working together for a common mission and a cause, like the mission of Japan Society is to connect American and Japanese people, culture, and society. And I added 4 words when I came in 7 years ago. and that was in a global context. And I think that's important because it allows you to open the aperture and it allows you to say, yes, the connection between the American people, culture, and society matters, but it's got to be done from that perspective, from a global perspective that allows you to see New York, not just for New York, but as a global stage. And I think that's what New Orleans offers. That's what that Japan Society there can do. And not every Japan Society needs to do what we do. It's costly, it's expensive, it's high production value, et cetera. But I think that in your own way, I think with this NAGES conference, you're going to open some new opportunities. And I hope that we can follow down that path. And I think even by having this podcast that you started before the boom out there and before someone like me had a podcast that I was doing this, like, why is it that Japan Society doesn't have a podcast like this? It's because Doug and Jennifer wanted to do this. They thought it was important enough of them to take the time that you spent the last hour talking with me. So while I may have the privilege of leading this organization, I may have a certain profile, I try to use that profile for the right thing, right? I think one of the challenges is when you grow up in Japan, you're told at an early age not to be the nail that sticks up because you'll get hammered down. And I respect that tremendously, but I do think we've got to tell our story better. And if we don't get out there and tell our story and the importance of U.S. Japan, then who will? And so I'm out there. I'm doing the best I can. I appreciate that you've been able to follow and see that. I hope more people do it, but my goal is not to increase followers or likes. It really is the mission and to really help more people find their own Japan story and their own Japan journey. And so if this conversation, if my book, if our organizations can do that, I love that. And I want to see more of that to come.
Awesome. Well, again, follow him on LinkedIn if you don't, because again, your stuff that you put out there is fantastic. The write-ups that you put, it's a really good place to just kind of get a good pulse of like what's going on in U.S. Japan relations, policy, or arts and culture. I mean, it's kind of a broad scope. So again, great follow. I think we follow you on Instagram. If not, we will. But yeah, so just stay on if you're interested in Japan, U.S. Japan relations. You can't go wrong with following what Japan Society is doing and keeping up to date with that. And Japan Society New Orleans too. Follow us. If you're listening to this, hopefully you already are. So, and I'm just rambling, so I don't know. I need to wrap this up.
Yep, good old Doug.
This is what I do. I can't close out podcasts. I should be seven seasons in. I should be better at this, but I'm not.
Then I'll try to help you.
There you
Doug.
go, Jennifer. Take
Thank
over.
you, Joshua, for coming on. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule, I'm sure, to even, sit down and talk with us. But I think you've wrapped everything up in a really good circle. You started on like that global aspect of the U.S. Japan relation and New York's role in it. And I think you tied it in again in our last comments that you had. So, thank you for just like enlightening us about everything, talking to us. Doug had this idea of this episode, Japan Society's Big and Small, and I think you really helped us do the topic justice. So thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you guys for what you're doing, and thank you. And I'm looking forward to seeing you at the conference.
Yeah,
yes,
definitely. Well, thank you.
Yes, we'll be sure to say hi.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
And that's a wrap on our Japan Society themed episode. Thank you so much for listening. And a massive thank you to Dr. Joshua Walker for joining to talk with us about his experiences with the Japan Society up in New York. It was great to hear how much of a role Japan Society Americas can play in a community despite their size, structure, and reach. The network is so vast, and I know for sure that our team with Japan Society of New Orleans will definitely look to learn from and collaborate with other organizations in years to come. Excited to see what the future holds for the U.S. Japan space. Make sure to give Joshua a follow to see what's next after his recent departure from the Japan Society. We'll have his socials and his book linked out in the show notes. Are you new to the crew in Season 7? Stick around and don't be a stranger. Give us a follow and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. There's plenty in our back catalog to take you on endless audio journeys through Japanese culture. While you're there, do us a solid and leave us a 5-star rating and review. Every single one of those ratings and reviews helps other listeners discover Crew of Japan and join our global crew. Or hey, maybe just let a friend know about us. Any and all support is incredibly appreciated. Are you involved with one of the many Japan America societies across the US? Share with us on Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, X. Just search Crew of Japan Podcast to stay in the loop with future episodes, upcoming Japan Society events, and Japan-related content. That's KREWEOFJAPAN. Or if you want to reach out to us directly, send us an email at crewofjapanpodcasts@gmail.com. We always love hearing from our listeners. But that's it for today. Until next time.
Looking to start your own podcast and don't know what platform to use? Tell me about it. When we started the Krewe Japan podcast, we tried a bunch of the big name recording platforms, but always came back to the one we're still currently using to this day, Zencastr. Zencastr is now the all-in-one solution making podcasting easy. In addition to its high audio and video quality for podcast production, Zencastr provides a full suite of production tools to record, produce, and publish studio quality content from the comfort of your home. Just log in through your browser and start recording. It's that simple. For us, we simply send out links to our guests and they join the lobby. But before you know it, it's all done and you have your studio quality audio and up to 4K video right there ready for you, right when you finish. The best part is having their multi-layered backups to ensure that your recordings are in the highest quality, regardless of anyone's internet connection stability. With Zencastr's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcasts in one place and distribute to all the major destinations. It's really that easy. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code KREWOFJAPAN, KREWEOFJAPAN, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. We want you to have the same easy experiences we do for all of our podcasting and content needs. It's your time to share your story.